Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror at 3:17 a.m. The bathroom light casts a harsh white glow across your tired face. Your chest is tight. You haven't really slept in days. Somewhere in the background, your phone lights up again. A message notification, probably another well-meaning friend saying, "Just think positive. Everything will work out." And you try. God, you try. You list 3 things you're grateful for. You smile at yourself in the mirror like the articles told you to. You whisper affirmations. I am strong. I am enough. I am safe. But something inside of you knows you're lying. The anxiety doesn't go away. The fog in your mind stays dense. And as the minutes drag on, that hollow feeling in your chest grows heavier, not lighter. You feel not only broken, but now guilty for being broken. As if your failure to feel better is your fault. As if your suffering is a betrayal of the sacred commandment of modern mental health. Stay positive, always. But what if that very commandment is the lie? What if the insistence on mental health positivity is not healing us, but slowly suffocating us? What if smiling through the pain, forcing optimism and drowning in daily affirmations is a new kind of repression? One dressed in soft colors, marketed with pastel fonts, and sold through influencer quotes. What if the modern culture of positivity is not a cure for suffering, but a way to avoid it entirely? We live in an era obsessed with wellness. The walls of our digital lives are plastered with messages like "good vibes only," "manifest abundance," and "your thoughts create your reality." Therapists on social media tell you to raise your vibration, while pop psychology posts urge you to choose happiness. But here's the paradox. We've never talked more about mental health. We've never had more tools, more therapists, more self-help books, more access to mindfulness, gratitude practices, journaling methods, and trauma-informed content. And yet, we're more anxious, more medicated, more suicidal, more disconnected, and more afraid than ever before. Why? How can we be surrounded by a booming mental health industry and still feel so fundamentally lost? Maybe because we're not feeling at all. Maybe because we've replaced facing our pain with performing our healing. Maybe because the cultural obsession with positivity has mutated into a kind of emotional censorship. One that punishes pain, demonizes discomfort, and leaves the wounded feeling like failures. Have you ever found yourself smiling just to avoid worrying someone? Have you ever pushed down your sadness because you didn't want to manifest negativity? Have you ever told yourself to stay strong when what you really needed was to collapse? Then you felt it, that quiet pressure, that unspoken rule. You're not allowed to fall apart, not really. Not out loud. In ancient times, people wore black when they grieved. They tore their clothes. They screamed. They wept in public. Mourning was visible, communal, and sacred. But now you're expected to grieve privately and quickly. Post a polished caption about growth and get back to your routine. Don't disturb the collective illusion of perpetual emotional control. What happens to a culture that turns pain into pathology and sadness into weakness? What happens when we are taught to fear our darker emotions? When we are conditioned to smile through grief, to pretend through rage, to hide behind toxic positivity until our real selves begin to vanish? Could it be that the true sickness isn't sadness, but the system that tells us we're not allowed to feel it? Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." But modern wellness wants none of your darkness. It wants your curated smiles, your filtered gratitude, your half-healed Instagram captions. What if healing doesn't look like being high vibe every day? What if healing means screaming into the void, breaking down, confronting your rage, and sitting with your sorrow without rushing to escape it? What if the real problem isn't that people are in pain, but that they've been told not to be? You begin to see the cracks in the pastel-painted mask, the affirmations that feel more like gaslighting, the spiritual bypassing disguised as alignment, the self-help slogans that shame you for being human. And in that realization, a deeper question starts to rise, one more unsettling than all the rest. What if mental health positivity isn't saving us, but silencing us? Hold that thought, because we haven't even reached the heart of the problem yet. The lie doesn't scream at you, it whispers. It lives in slogans, in shared posts, in the careful branding of self-help culture. It tells you to be strong, but only in a way that's digestible. It tells you to heal, but only quietly. It tells you to feel, but only if those feelings are curated for public consumption. This isn't just a glitch in the system, it is the system. To understand the roots of this problem, you have to go deeper than psychology textbooks or therapy worksheets. You must enter the underworld of the human psyche, where archetypes roam, where pain has a voice, where truth is unfiltered and often unbearable. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we're taught to hide: rage, envy, grief, hopelessness. These aren't bad emotions, they're merely inconvenient ones. Inconvenient for a culture that thrives on appearances. Inconvenient for an industry built on constant, measurable progress. The modern mental health movement, for all its surface-level compassion, often doesn't invite you to meet your shadow. It invites you to overcome it, to bypass it, to distract from it. And in doing so, it repeats the very psychological error that causes so much of our suffering: repression. But repression never disappears. It festers. Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. When sadness is denied, it returns as chronic emptiness. When anger is demonized, it resurfaces as passive aggression, bitterness, or self-destruction. When fear is shamed, it becomes anxiety so subtle and persistent that we mistake it for our personality. Modern society has become a masterclass in avoidance, and nowhere is this more visible than in how we talk about mental health. On the surface, there's inclusion, empathy, and awareness. But beneath the surface, there's a deep discomfort with anything that cannot be solved with 10 steps or 5 tips or a single affirmation. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer had no such illusions. He called life a constant pendulum between suffering and boredom. He saw suffering not as an anomaly, but as a feature of existence, a universal experience that cannot be surgically removed through good vibes and gratitude journals. But we live in a world that pathologizes pain and medicates discomfort. Depression is framed as a chemical imbalance, and anxiety as a disorder of the brain. And while these can be valid lenses, they're also deeply limiting ones. They reduce the existential terror of being alive to a neurotransmitter malfunction. They flatten the richness of human suffering into something purely clinical. Why? Because clinical pain can be managed, marketed, monetized. Aldous Huxley once warned us about this in Brave New World, a society that chose comfort over freedom, pleasure over truth. In Huxley's dystopia, people didn't rebel because they were enslaved. They didn't even realize they were enslaved. They were kept docile with soma, a drug that erased suffering. They lived in an artificial peace, untroubled by death, grief, or inner torment. Sound familiar? Today, soma doesn't come in pill form, though sometimes it does. It comes in distraction, in relentless positivity, in carefully managed emotional aesthetics. And when suffering leaks through the cracks, we're taught to immediately treat it, not to learn from it. But pain is not a malfunction. It is information. Nietzsche understood this better than anyone. He wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." He saw suffering not as something to be eliminated, but transformed. For Nietzsche, pain was the crucible through which greatness is forged. Yet our cultural narrative is the opposite. It says, if you're suffering, something is wrong with you. If you feel broken, fix it. Fast, smile, meditate, manifest. Don't disrupt the polished image of healing that's been carefully constructed by those who have monetized our despair. Even Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that suffering, while not necessary, is deeply capable of being meaningful. He wrote that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But what does changing ourselves mean in a world that equates inner transformation with aesthetic performance? Too often, it means pretending to be okay before we are. Too often, it means reciting mantras when we should be screaming. Too often, it means hiding in the false light of positivity instead of braving the honest dark of transformation. And the most dangerous part? It feels like growth. It looks like healing. It sounds like progress, but it's an echo chamber, a carefully filtered echo chamber of people reassuring each other that everything is fine, even when it's not. Because facing the truth is terrifying. Because admitting that some wounds don't heal on a schedule is deeply uncomfortable. Because we've been taught that emotional pain is something to be fixed, like a broken appliance, not listened to like a sacred messenger. But the pain is not the enemy. The discomfort is not the failure. The breakdown is not a betrayal of your healing. It is the healing. And once you see it, once you realize how deep this conditioning goes, you begin to understand the full weight of the lie. The lie that says you are only worthy when you're getting better. The lie that tells you your darkness must be hidden until it's safe. The lie that takes your deepest humanity and repackages it as a glitch in your biology or a flaw in your mindset. But we haven't even scratched the surface of what this lie costs us. Because the most tragic part isn't just that we're being silenced, it's what we're becoming because of it. You don't notice it at first. It's subtle, quiet, like a slow leak in the soul. It starts with a smile you force when your chest is aching. Then the instinct to filter your truth in conversation. You begin censoring yourself in subtle ways, avoiding topics that are too heavy, too real. You tell people, "I'm doing okay," even when you're not. And then, at some point, you start believing that your pain has no place in the world unless it's wrapped in a bow and labeled lesson. That's how it begins. That's how the cult of mental health positivity works. Not by erasing your pain, but by convincing you to sanitize it, to disguise it, to spiritualize it into something consumable. And what begins as a coping strategy becomes a character, a version of you that's always healing, always working on it, always smiling through the storm. But the storm doesn't disappear just because you refuse to look at it. It builds quietly inside your nervous system, inside the unfinished thoughts you bury, inside the conversations you never allow yourself to have. And eventually, it manifests, not as relief, but as emotional numbness, existential fatigue, or unexplained anger you direct at yourself. These are the unseen consequences. Let's break them open. 1. Emotional fragmentation. When you're taught that only positive emotions are acceptable, your emotional range begins to shrink. You start labeling your own feelings as good or bad. Joy, acceptable. Gratitude, encouraged. Grief, dangerous. Rage, toxic. But your emotional life is not a PR campaign. It's a symphony. And when you mute the ugly notes, you don't just become more pleasant. You become less alive. Neuroscience confirms this. When you suppress one emotion, you suppress them all. Studies show that repressing sadness or anger doesn't just make you nicer. It makes you less capable of experiencing joy, intimacy, and meaning. You become a curated self, not a whole one. And in this fragmentation, something tragic happens. Your authentic self begins to fade. 2. The tyranny of self-improvement. Mental health positivity has become the new productivity. If you're not actively healing, improving, manifesting, optimizing, you're failing. Even pain must now have a purpose. You're no longer allowed to simply suffer. You must transform through it. This mindset, though dressed in spiritual language, mirrors capitalism itself. Everything must have value. Every trauma must produce wisdom. Every breakdown must be a setup for a comeback. But not all pain is a plot point. Some pain just is. Some suffering doesn't come with a silver lining. And when we demand that it does, we invalidate the people who are still in the midst of it, those who haven't transcended their grief, those who are still crawling through the darkness. We don't need more motivational quotes. We need permission to bleed without apologizing for the mess. 3. Addiction to appearances. In a culture dominated by social media, your inner life becomes a performance. Healing becomes an aesthetic. You're rewarded not for your honesty, but for how beautifully you package your vulnerability. A crying selfie with a poetic caption. A post about your anxiety that ends with a hopeful takeaway. Anything less is too much. But real pain doesn't care about optics. It's not symmetrical. It's not Instagrammable. It's often ugly, incoherent, and terrifying. And so we begin to fake it. We smile when we want to scream. We say, "I'm fine," when we're breaking. We post motivational reels about overcoming darkness while we sink into it silently at night. Maybe the real healing begins not when we chase happiness, but when we dare to face what we've buried. When we stop pretending we're fine and start asking why we need to. If this resonated with you, you're not alone. This channel exists for those who think deeper, feel more, and refuse to accept surface-level answers. There are more truths to uncover about the mind, the self, and the world we live in. So if you're ready to keep going down the path others avoid, subscribe and join us in the search for what's real.